Welcome to the 33rd Vigil for Julian Assange Online. I'm Joe Loria from Consortium News, and I'm joined by Elizabeth Voss, also of Consortium News. We have a lot of news to discuss this week, so we'll get right into the headlines. First, we'll start with some good news. Swedish court blocked a request from the prosecutors for a European arrest warrant in the reopened case, the sexual assault allegations from 9 years ago. Assange has never been charged. He was questioned in the embassy after a long time when he had requested, or he would welcome the Swedes to go over there and talk to him. They refused under British pressure. That case was dropped twice before and now has been reopened again. And the courts turned down this request. Apparently, when this last happened, in 2010, when Assange actually lost his extradition hearings to Sweden, which is why he went into the Ecuador embassy, the prosecutor had made the request for the arrest warrant, which was granted, not a court, and that's the way it's supposed to happen. So this time a court asked for the extradition and the arrest warrant, rather, which is necessary for the extradition, and it was denied. So he's not going to Sweden unless the prosecutors appeal, but they've indicated they will fly to London to question him in Belmarsh prison. So that was a bit of good news, because in my view, it puts the pressure on Great Britain to make the decision now alone. They can't palm him off to Sweden. And the other bit of good news was, well, the United States Department of Justice decided they would not add further charges to Assange in regard to the Vault 7 indictment. That was, of course, the Vault 7 release. The Vault 7 release was one of the biggest of WikiLeaks. It made public some of the most closely held secrets of the CIA, particularly their spying methods. It absolutely incensed the then CIA director, Mike Pompeo, who afterward called WikiLeaks a hostile non-state intelligence service. They are not going to add charges on that, but as we'll hear later in the headlines, there's a possibility of other charges coming on a completely different matter about which we know only very little at the moment. Elizabeth.
Right. Yeah, no, so it's good to start with a little bit of good news, but unfortunately, we also have headlines regarding the fact that after Assange's Espionage Act indictment, police in Australia also moved against more journalists for publishing classified material. Consortium News reported that following the arrest and Espionage Act indictment of Assange, a number of police actions against journalists for publishing classified information and other journalistic activity heightened fears among mainstream journalists that they could be next. So we saw that in Sydney, Australia, on Wednesday, police raided the offices of the taxpayer-funded Australian Broadcasting Corporation, copying thousands of files relating to a 2017 ABC broadcast that revealed allegations of war crimes by Australian special forces in Afghanistan. The 3 Australian federal police officers and 3 police technicians entered ABC's Sydney headquarters with a search warrant that named 2 ABC investigative journalists and the network's news director. The police demanded to look through the journalists' emails, ABC reported. David Anderson, the ABC managing director, said it was highly unusual for the national broadcaster to be raided in this way. And they said that this is a serious development and raises legitimate concerns over freedom of the press and proper public scrutiny of national security and defense matters. The ABC stands by its journalists, will protect its sources, and continue to report without fear or favor on national security and intelligence issues when there's a clear public interest. And that was from John Lyons, ABC's executive director and head of investigative journalism. He tweeted, live tweeting AFP raid. Don't think I've done one of these before. He also said that the federal police were going through dozens of emails with the authority to delete or even change their content. So protagonist Winston Smith's job in Orwell's 1984 was to rewrite news archives. So yeah, I mean, it's just an absolutely absurd story. And we also had a political editor's home that was raided in Canberra. So Canberra police on Tuesday morning, in an unrelated case, entered the home of political editor of the Murdoch-owned Daily Telegraph. And that was journalist Anika Smethurst, who opened her front door to find 7 AFP officers waiting for her because she dared to do her job and keep the nation informed on what its government was doing. And that was a quote from the Telegraph in an editorial. We also saw French journalists arrested, and San Francisco police raided a journalist's home as well in the US. So overall, this is a huge, huge escalation in the prosecution and persecution of journalists. And I think that finally, although far too late, we're seeing these journalists wake up to the danger of prosecution of Assange.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, the Smethurst arrest was because of an article she'd written in April of 2018, last year. It was about the possibility of new laws in Australia to allow spying on civilians, ironically. That's what her story was about. The story that ABC was rated over was, as you mentioned, a story about Afghanistan in which they revealed crimes that were committed by soldiers, alleged war crimes. It was leaked by a lawyer, very senior lawyer in the Australian Army, who went through the channels to try to be the whistleblower, and they just attacked him instead. So he went to the ABC. He's been arrested. He's been giving a lot of interviews, and he said that he was disappointed actually in the ABC coverage because he had given evidence that senior officers were aware of these crimes and did nothing about it. In other words, he wanted generals to be exposed, but the ABC only wrote about the lowly soldiers. But nonetheless, that was a story from 2017, very similar to WikiLeaks about Afghanistan, a revelation of a war crime. And here are the police marching in. Now, the point I'm making here is April 2018 and 2017. These were stories from a year and 2 years ago. And why now, only about 2 weeks after the espionage indictment of Assange, do we see these two arrests in Australia? And WikiLeaks provides maybe an answer in a tweet. It said, and this is while the raid was still going on, the criminalization and crackdown on national security journalism is spreading like a virus. The Assange precedent is already having effect. Journalists must unite and remember that courage is also contagious. Elizabeth.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. And we also saw some unfortunate news this week about Assange's father being bumped by doctors. I don't know if you were going to discuss that, Joe, but it's very concerning. And a lot of us were horrified hearing that.
Yeah, I'll take that one up. But before I do, I wanted to mention that there is now calls in the Australian Parliament for new laws, regulations, even constitutional changes to protect journalism. This could be a major issue. Australia does not have a First Amendment. They don't have a Bill of Rights. There's been calls for a Charter of Rights in the Parliament. So there's been enormous backlash to this. Assange's father, John Shipton, was in London a couple of days ago. He might still be there, and he had an appointment to see his son in the hospital ward of Belmarsh Prison, and his appointment had to be canceled because two doctors were going there instead at that time to see his son. And that was a report in the Brisbane Courier Mail newspaper. They quote Shipton as saying, "My visit was double booked. It has been canceled. The doctor's visit must be at short notice because a double booking occurred." This leads us into really with the main story that I think we're going to spend a lot of time talking about, and I'll turn it over to Elizabeth, but he is still in the hospital, and yet we have seen a video emerge just a couple of hours ago, published by Abruptly on RT and on YouTube. Elizabeth.
Right. So we saw that video emerge just, within 24 hours of the press realizing that a Belmarsh prison inmate had allegedly provided photos of Julian Assange via Twitter. And we had a report on that broke the story by Cassandra Fairbanks that I'd like to read part of to you all, just to get us up to speed on this story. So the Gateway Pundit exclusively reported it with photos as well as the testimony of the alleged fellow inmate of imprisoned WikiLeaks founder Assange inside London's Belmarsh prison. So the inmate, who wished to remain anonymous, sent multiple photos of Assange from inside Belmarsh maximum security prison and spoke to the Gateway Pundit about the WikiLeaks founder situation using a contraband phone he has inside. So Assange is imprisoned in the United Kingdom and faces 18 charges at this time under the Espionage Act, or at the time of writing. I believe there's talk of another indictment on the way that we'll talk about later. But if extradited and convicted, Assange could face a maximum sentence of 175 years, et cetera, et cetera. Cassandra spoke to the inmate at at hand here, and said that through a series of online messages and a phone call for multiple hours on Wednesday evening, the conversation said she asked him in the conversation if he was a prisoner or someone who works in the prison, and what his motivation was, whether it was to extort money from the organization, i.e. WikiLeaks. And the prisoner said, quote, "I'm in prison right now," sending a photo from inside his cell. He said, "Extort for what reason?" He exposed the biggest scandal in the world. Whose side do you think someone in prison would be on? The government who has us locked up here, or a fellow prisoner who actually doesn't deserve to be here? The inmate said that he believes Assange needs his story told properly and is attempting to do what he can to help. He said that he hoped publishing the photos would lead to more people reading about his case. When asked if they were attempting to sell the photos, the inmate claimed that the Sun had offered him $10,000, but he declined because the publication was not interested in telling Assange's story properly. He said that he was only willing to share what he had to say and the accompanying photos with an outlet that supports his fellow inmate, and reiterated that his goal was simply to raise awareness about the truth of Assange's case. The photos feature Assange prior to his illness and being moved into the prison's hospital wing last month. The Gateway Pundit was not able to verify if Assange is aware of the existence of the photographs, and the Gateway Pundit was not asked for and did not provide any compensation for the interview or permission to use the photos. And I believe that, one of the reasons that this was important to get out there was, just as the inmate said, to, kind of beat the establishment media who may have used this for some sort of untoward, misguided story. But the inmate went on to say, quote, "He's not going to win this case through the law. He's going to win it because there's a public outcry." And he added that the mainstream media is controlled by the government, and said that the internet is the one thing they can't control. And all of the post was for Assange, about 500 letters for him, referring to the letters that are sent to the prison. Another quote from them said, "I am particularly alarmed at the recent announcement by the US Department of Justice of 17 new charges against Mr. Assange under the Espionage Act, carrying up to 175 years in prison. This may as well result in a life sentence without parole, or possibly even the death penalty." So that's just a selection of quotes from the prisoner published by the Gateway Pundit. Joe, what are your thoughts on that one?
Well, these still photos that we saw yesterday have now been backed up with the video. I was very suspicious when I saw the photos initially. And when reading Cassandra's story, there's many, many questions that arise, and we can talk about that. This does not sound like a prisoner to me, the way he's speaking. It just, the way he's talking about Assange and his real story, and he turned down $10,000. Why not pounds? The story actually says, in Cassandra's story, says that while we cannot confirm the authenticity of any of the inmates' statements or motives, so that's a big caveat there, whether this was really a prisoner talking to Cassandra or not, whether he's responsible for these photos. The timing of this is the most disturbing thing to me. It comes just a few days after the UN rapporteur put out his report in saying that Assange had been psychologically tortured, that he couldn't speak without jumping up and down. And we know now that he was hospitalized. He's still in the hospital. And these pictures make him look quite, well, I think he looks relatively healthy to compared to someone who's in a hospital bed. He's smiling. He's smiling. He's not in solitary, at least in these, as we've heard from WikiLeaks, that he was spending 23 hours a day inside. We could talk again. You can't get a cell phone in there, so somebody clearly smuggled in a cell phone. If it was indeed a prisoner who took these pictures, I don't know who's behind this. I really don't. I have huge questions about that we're going to ask our guests about in a minute. Let's read the next headline, which is simply a short one. Well, in relation to that, WikiLeaks tweeted a day or two ago from an interview with the Meltzer, Mr. Niles Meltzer, the rapporteur on torture, and he was asked, if your calls are ignored, do you fear that Assange could actually die in prison? And he said, absolutely, yes, that's a fear. I think it is very real. So Meltzer saying in this interview, I think it was with ABC Radio in Australia, that he thinks he could die in prison. And then all of a sudden we see these pictures of a pretty healthy and smiling Julian Assange in a jail that looks almost like, these guys are hanging out and they have the little table football game there. So I want to. That's all I'm going to say about that right now. The extradition hearing date that Assange was supposed to stand for was June 12th. It's been moved back to June 14th, and it will now take place in Belmarsh Magistrates Court. In other words, the courtroom in the prison. That means Assange is not healthy enough to come and travel to the Magistrates Court in London outside of the prison. Next story, Elizabeth, about the possibility of new charges that WikiLeaks put out this release, I believe, yesterday, and it's quite interesting, or today, I can't recall, but if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, it was yesterday evening, U.S. time. WikiLeaks prepared a press release and published a press release stating on Twitter, quote, the DOJ planning to file an additional indictment against Assange. Trump's DOJ is so desperate to build its case against Assange, it is using a star witness who is a sociopath, a convicted conman, and sex criminal involved in an FBI entrapment operation against WikiLeaks. And I'm going to read at least part of the statement by WikiLeaks, their press release. They said that the United States Department of Justice is preparing a new superseding indictment against WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange before the extradition request deadline on June 14. Dutch public broadcaster NOS reported that Sigurdur Thordarson was flown to the United States last week, where he was comprehensively interrogated in preparation for the filing of the new superseding indictment against Julian Assange by the end of next week. NOS reported that on May 6th this year, FBI Special Agent Megan Brown, who leads the FBI investigation against Assange, traveled to Iceland together with prosecutor Kellen Dwyer from the Eastern District of Virginia to reinterrogate FBI informant Thordarson with the help of Icelandic police. Dwyer's cut and paste error led to the revelation in November 2018 that the Department of Justice had indicted Assange. On May 27th, U.S. authorities flew Sigurdur Thordarson, sorry about that name, to Washington, D.C. for further interrogations, where he remained until June 1st. Kristen Hafrenson, the editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, said, quote, the Trump administration is so desperate to build its case against WikiLeaks publisher Julian Assange that it is using a diagnosed sociopath, a convicted conman and sex criminal who was exposed by the highest levels of the Icelandic government as an FBI informant and who was involved in an entrapment operation in 2011 against Julian Assange. So Thordarson, who was recently released from prison, agreed to be interrogated to help build a case against Assange. Thordarson had served a 3-year sentence for multiple counts of embezzlement and fraud, including against WikiLeaks, and sex crimes against 9 minors. Thordarson stole tens of thousands of dollars from WikiLeaks and impersonated Assange in order to carry out the embezzlement. As part of the criminal prosecution of Thordarson in Iceland, he was examined by a forensic psychiatrist who diagnosed him as a sociopath. Thordarson told NOS that the interrogations focused on his communications with fellow FBI informant Hector Monsegur, aka Sabu. These contacts involve an operation by the FBI that was exposed as an entrapment operation against Assange by the Interior Minister of Iceland, Ögmundur Jónasson, as reported by the Daily Mail in 2013. And while the case would collapse in the US due to the prosecution's reliance on testimony by Thordarson and Monsegur, who are not credible witnesses, the United States can conceal their witnesses' identities during UK extradition proceedings in order to boost their chances of winning. And this will make it impossible for Assange to challenge the credibility of the witnesses during UK extradition proceedings, which will commence on the 14th of June. In 2011, the Icelandic government expelled 8 or 9 FBI agents and prosecutors who had flown from the Eastern District of Virginia because they were conducting unauthorized activities on Icelandic soil against Assange and WikiLeaks. This episode was reported in the New York Times in 2013. At the time, Iceland's Minister of the Interior, Ögmundur Jónasson, told the Daily Mail that he had made it clear at the time that if he had to take sides with either WikiLeaks or the FBI or CIA, he would have no difficulty choosing. He would be on the side of WikiLeaks. By contrast, the current Icelandic government has cooperated with the Trump administration's effort to build a case against WikiLeaks. Kristen Hafrenson said yesterday sent a letter demanding an explanation from the Icelandic Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, et cetera. And last week, of course, as we just discussed, UN Special Rapporteur on Torture Niels Melzer presented his findings, which obviously discussed the fact that he believed that Assange had been tortured by the ongoing psychological persecution against him. So, Joe, I don't know what
Yes,
you're at.
it's very troubling. Obviously, especially the part where they could use this evidence in the extradition hearing and not have to reveal who the witnesses are. But that means the U.S. will have to file these charges by June 14. Now, that's the deadline to get all the charges in that they want him extradited for. Of course, just about every FBI informant is some kind of criminal and a not credible witness, very much impeachable. However, they have some kind of physical evidence or forensic evidence, then the credibility of the witness is not as essential. It's if he could produce something. Now, he was known as a hacker, this guy, Siggy, I think his nickname was. We'd have to think that maybe this is what they're trying to build, because this is also, I think, a backlash. The backlash that they got from the Espionage Act from major media figures like Maddow. I think the government feels on safer ground from public relations point of view with a charge like the initial one of computer intrusion, which we know was not really hacked because Chelsea Mann had legal access to all that material. She just needed her identity hidden, and the indictment explains that, even though they try to get away with this computer intrusion thing. So we'll have to wait and see what these charges might be. But even if it's just used for the extradition purposes, that would be troubling enough, let alone whether they actually tried to charge him in a courtroom with that later on. Lastly, we have again some good positive feelings about this whole saga that we've been talking about for months now, and it's just a couple of tweets I wanted to read out from two people who support Julian Assange. One is Glenn Greenwald. He tweeted, "Between exposing massive U.S. war crimes and then committing the even worse sin of publishing documents harmful to Hillary and the DNC, Julian Assange is so despised in the West that even slowly torturing him to death with no medical care, that's what's been happening, is viewed as justified." And the response to that from Jill Stein, the Green Party presidential candidate, was, "Time to call Julian Assange what he is, a political prisoner persecuted for publishing information that reveal crimes of the powerful. Democrats, Republicans, and global elites despise him for exposing war crimes and corruption. Fight for his freedom to protect our own. Free Assange." George and Margaret, either one of you is ever quicker to the gun. Jump in and talk about this video. What do you guys think? If you see,
well, I think that I tend to agree with you, Joe. I was very suspicious of the pictures and the story yesterday, and my feelings were the same as yours. The quotes made this person sound not at all like a prisoner. He was just a little too politically sophisticated, a little too aware of the way how to shape public opinion. It just seems very unlikely that there's somebody like that there. Also, I mean, if once you release this, how are the prison authorities going to respond? I mean, that's it. The prison authorities are going to come down on you like a ton of bricks. They're going to, bring the whole, take the whole place apart, every single, bed, mattress, bookcase, to find this contraband phone. So by disclosing this footage, I mean, you're pretty much put pay to any further footage, because they're gonna come and take your phone away, but quick, and punish you quite severely for having a contraband phone. So what's behind this? Well, I mean, my take would just be a rather obvious one, which is his parole. He's up for parole really in 4 months, which isn't really that long. I mean, what's the best grounds for denying Julian parole? Well, he's disrupting the good order of the prison. He's doing something, the worst kind of thing you can possibly do in prison, which is you have contraband stuff in prison. You're allowing footage to be exported to the outside world, and even that whole thing about, well, he's no need to fight in the courtroom. The thing to do is to fight for public opinion, would show a certain contempt for the law, and that would just again reinforce the whole British judiciary narrative about Julian, is that he's a narcissist and he doesn't care about the law. He's only interested in public relations. So I think this is all about discrediting him, whether it's the parole hearing, whether it's something to do with the extradition issue. But I think this is not good news, and I think this is a very bad business for him. And I also was taken aback by how well he looked. I mean,
yeah,
okay, like you. I mean, well, relatively speaking. I mean, you know, it didn't look that bad. I mean, admittedly, okay, UK prisons are not the monstrosities that US prisons are, but this didn't look bad. As I said, there was this football around there, people standing around chatting. They wore their own clothes. I mean, he was wearing, you know, a quite pleasant kind of sweatshirt. Very casual conversation. Again, a very different picture from the one that you know, has been conveyed by the news stories recently. So,
if I can jump in on that really fast.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
The problem with that too, the reason that that's so suspicious to many of us is because we don't know when that footage was taken. It could have been the first day or so that he was there, and maybe he was, you know, looking relatively healthy at that time, and maybe he's genuinely not now. And so the idea that, you know, now you have the QAnon crazy crowd saying, oh, look, see, he's fine. It's protective custody or whatever. So that can be very, very damaging, even though I'm sure, you know, we're glad to see pictures of Assange and know that he's, at least at one point, was all right. I think there is a potential there for that to be damaging, but please go ahead.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm done for the time being. So.
I had the same feeling. It was just like, well, who is taking this picture? I mean, it's not unheard of for prisoners to have contraband, even to have contraband phones. So it's not impossible for that to be true. But I was less skeptical when I just saw the still photo. I thought that was more possible. Somebody has sneaked in a phone and manages to get out photos. But this video made me very suspicious for all of the reasons that the rest of you have stated. And although I had one rather sad thought, you know, Julian spent so much time alone in the embassy. I thought to myself, you know, it might be nobody. I know he doesn't want to be in prison. I don't want to say that, but I just had a thought of, you know, he might be in some way have some comfort in just being around other people, even though it's in a prison. So that was my, you know, my sad thought for him. So it's been a good week with the Swedish decision, but this video is just very weird, and I think it pays for us all to be at the very least skeptical about its origins and about who did it. We can't trust these intelligence agencies. They haven't gone through all this to let Julian go free. They are going to do everything they possibly can to keep him. And I'm going to quote Mike Pompeo, who, you know, is our idiot Secretary of State, who blurted out, you know, at the CIA, we lied, we cheated, we stole. And that's what they do. That's what these intelligence agencies do. And they are always thinking ahead. They're always thinking about some way to discredit anybody they want and to promote their own point of view.
You know, it's just confusing the public. And if you look, I saw this 16 minutes after Rupley posted it. And already there was a comment or two on YouTube was, oh, he's out of hospital. He's better now. The impression being that this is the way he's right now. Not when these videos were taken. And they were taken obviously some time ago, but not apparently when he first got in there, because there was shots of him in his cell where on the floor there's quite a few books and newspapers, the Times. You can see a copy of the Times of London there. Can't see a date on there, unfortunately, it's too far away. But he's got newspapers and books, which I wasn't aware of as well. There's sunshine coming through those windows. We heard so much about the lack of sunshine that he had at the embassy. But somebody took these videos and held on to them for quite a while now, it would seem, and now releases them. So the timing is the most suspicious thing to me. And I can't help but think it came after Meltzer's report and to try to blunt the effectiveness of what that report said. But I have more questions and answers here, George. I have much more.
I'm absolutely convinced that it was an attempt to blunt the effect of the report. But I think that this is going to come back and hurt Julian, because I think the prison authorities are going to accuse him of being somehow responsible. He's somehow involved in this, and that he was arranged with whoever took this footage, that he wanted to get this this footage out into the rest of the world, because he wants to fight against the government, fight the power, and so on. So it's all being done in order to poison public opinion against Julian and the judicial system. And as I say, he's up for parole within 4 months, which is, that's no time at all. So,
George, I want to stop you, George, because we have Cassandra Fairbanks waiting to come on, and I'm really happy about that. She can shed more light on this, probably more than any of us combined. Cassandra, are you there? Please unmute.
There you go. There you go.
Hey, I don't have super long, but I wanted to hop on because everybody has a lot of questions and
yes,
like that. I can't answer a lot of them because, like you guys, I don't know for sure what this person's motives are. I only know what they've told me, but I can explain how it came about, and I think that might help a little bit for people who are really concerned. So what happened was the day before yesterday at like 6 a.m., I found out about this account on Twitter, had no followers, but they were tweeting photos at like reporters, WikiLeaks supporters, things like that, claiming to be an inmate and trying to push this fundraiser, really bizarre fundraiser. So I started monitoring it around 6 a.m. the day before yesterday, and I was watching it all day. I was watching who was following it, who they were tweeting at, who was retweeting it. I reached out to a lot of people who had retweeted and been like, hey, please don't tweet that yet. Like, let's figure out who this person is. And then finally, I made a fake account and I tweeted at them and I was like, hey, can you DM me? So I started talking to him, chatting with them. They told me that they were inmate. They were sending me pictures from inside their cell, which obviously could still be a guard who is inside a cell. It doesn't necessarily prove anything, but I was trying to collect information and figure out what was going on. And so then maybe like 4:30 in the morning, before I published, I noticed that a CNN producer followed them. And that's when I was like, all right, I need to write a story and get it out, because if CNN is the one who pushes this out, they're going to push it out with the DOJ press releases. They're going to push it out with fake narratives and smears. And obviously, this would get a lot of attention if it broke on CNN. So instead of allowing that to happen, me and multiple other people, I sent my draft to a lot of our friends to look over before we published. We decided to push it out with the UN report. I tried to include almost all of the UN report with it. And I knew that if Gateway Pundit was the first to break it, then no media outlet was going to want to touch it because nobody likes to source Gateway Pundit. So it was an attempt, a frazzled attempt to circumvent CNN gaining the exclusive. So essentially that's what made my decision to publish it. But beyond that, I did speak to him on the phone. I spoke to him on Twitter. I ended up speaking to him for, probably 10 hours between phone calls and messages and things like that. He claimed over and over again that he's a supporter of WikiLeaks. He was like, I'm a prisoner. Would I side with the government that has me in here, or Julian Assange, who is a hero? And all I could do was report what he said. I didn't want to put my own beliefs into the article. So I reported what he said. I reported the concerns. I reported WikiLeaks's legal team's rebuttal about, things like the canteen and whatnot. But yeah, that's essentially how it came about. Sorry for rambling. I don't have super.
Cassandra, what kind of did he sound like? An Englishman? Did he? What could you make out?
He's definitely British. Yeah. And it sounded well, I actually don't want to say too much descriptive information about him because I'm concerned that if he is retaliated against, that this could blow back on Julian.
Right.
So, because I don't know if he's,
But did he seem a little more too intelligent for a typical prisoner? I mean, and 10 hours is
there's
a hell
lots
of
of
a long.
intelligent prisoners. Julian's a prisoner right now.
No, that's true.
I
But
don't
somebody
think
who's so
the
well
prisoners
versed in, well,
stupid.
forget about intelligent, but so well versed in the WikiLeaks story.
Well,
I
I
mean,
did talk to him about this. Basically, once Julian went into the prison, he became like a superstar in there, because everybody was curious about him. He said that the number one question Julian was getting asked is the Illuminati real? And people were just intrigued by him.
What about when? When did he take these videos? Did you get into that question?
He said that, that was in my story. He said that it was about a month ago. It was before he got sick, before he went in to the hospital wing. I also want to note that these pictures were especially shocking for me because I just saw him in March, and it looks like he's lost 30 pounds. And so to me, everybody's saying that he looks really healthy and great. I think that people who have seen him recently, beyond being dragged out of the embassy, can all attest that these pictures are actually quite shocking. Like, the amount of weight that he's lost in such a short period of time is crazy.
Yeah, but he's healthy compared to being in the hospital as he is now.
Right,
That's what I mean.
You got to remember, this is before he went
Right.
into the hospital wing. There was another thing I wanted to say, but now I'm blanking. It's been crazy, and of course I can't verify anything that this guy is saying, and I can't just call up Julian Assange and ask him, but I thought it was important that we attach this story to the truth, instead of just CNN being like, this guy, here's pictures of Julian Assange, the hacker or whatever.
Did he tell you how he got these pictures out of there, and to roughly know the video? How did he get out?
Well, I can't speak for Rupley, but he did send me, he told me about the videos yesterday. He sent me screenshots, and they included pictures of Julian's cell, which I chose not to release. And it's also why I didn't even want the video, because I thought that was a really big invasion of privacy. Because again, I can only assume that Julian doesn't know that these pictures were taken. But the inmate, he told me that he has multiple phones. If you look up Belmarsh in their last report, there's like an annual, what's it called? People go in and inspect it and speak to the inmates and things like that. If you read the last report, there's a huge problem with cell phones getting into the prison, and it's leading to massive gang fights and things like that, power struggles. But this inmate, he's active on Twitter. He made an account specifically for this, but he had been following WikiLeaks because, Julian got in there. According to him, I'm not saying this is true because obviously I don't know, but he said that, he's been talking to Julian a lot. He really is interested in him. So he's been following the case online, and he was very upset that the media has been smearing him. He told me that the guards have been smearing Julian to the other inmates and referring to him as a rapist, because everybody knows how rapists get treated in prison, right? And so he told me that he didn't believe that the guards were malicious, but that they were uninformed and that they were buying into the media lies. And so he was hoping that by putting out these pictures, he could get somebody to write it and include what he was asking be pushed out with it. And he really wanted to express that Julian is not actually a rapist.
If I could jump in and ask you a question.
Please.
Yeah.
I'd like to know, what do you, and asking a question that wouldn't ask you to identify this person, but regardless of any of that, what do you feel like at a gut level that person's real motivations might have been? Do you believe their story that they support Assange, or do you think there may be something else going on? I'm just curious.
I think that I believe that they support Assange, and I think that they might have been misguided about how to go about trying to help. I think that they're trying to do what they can with what resources they can, and I'm I'm not convinced that it was malicious necessarily. I have a lot of more reasons for believing that, but again, these are things that I feel might help identify this person, and I do not think that that's a good idea.
No, agreed, for sure.
So I think that they're somebody who meant well, for the most part. But again, that's complete speculation, because the government does crazy things, and you can't really be sure of who anyone is or what their motives are. But what he was saying to me was consistent, and it sounded like they wanted to help. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could I just ask, did he tell you that Julian was aware that he was being photographed, or not, or that Julian wasn't aware? Did he have any sense of whether Julian was aware of this?
I don't believe Julian was aware, but I don't know.
And what about the thing about the son? He said that. How did the son get to know about this this thing and offered him $10,000?
That's how this account caught my attention. They had been tweeting at reporters. They were tweeting at various people. So I'm assuming that they tweeted it at a Sun reporter. They were deleting a lot of tweets as they were going while I was watching their account, but they had been tweeting at a bunch of people trying to get their attention. And I can only assume that they did manage to get the attention of somebody at the Sun. But again, I don't even know if that's true. I reached out to the Sun to try and get a comment about if they actually reached out to them, and they didn't respond to me. So I don't know.
It seemed to me watching the video that Julian was looking right into the camera. I got the feeling that he definitely knew he was being photographed. But I don't know what that tells us, but it seemed to me he was aware of the recording that was going on. I mean, that's a difficult position for him. He doesn't know who the person is. Should he complain? Would he complain? I don't know. I'm not saying that tells us anything about the motives of the individual and whether they are who they claim to be. But I'm just going to remain suspicious, especially since we don't know how this will impact. This is prison after all. Let's not, Julian is a famous prisoner, maybe the most famous prisoner in the world, but prisons work pretty much the same. They have rules, and if you're a prominent person, that can be problematic. They're not treated well. I mean, the fact that, 2 visits a month? I think that's what they said. And if the father can't see him, his own father can't see him because the doctors are seeing him. So let's not forget this is jail, and he is at risk of being treated the way anybody in a jail anywhere in the world is going to be treated.
Yeah.
Cassandra, the phone that you spoke with him on, was it the same cell phone that he took the pictures with? Not the prison phone?
I'm not sure. He told me that he has multiple phones.
Oh my goodness. Multiple
there's
phones.
He was like, this is the future. We all have Twitter in here. The conversation was pretty funny at times, admittedly, and there were a few anecdotes that made me smile, like the fact he reiterated a story about how there was one day that nobody in the entire unit of 300 people got mail, but Julian got 500 pieces of mail, and he was like, man, it really made his day. He was smiling, and so he was asking me to encourage people to keep writing letters, because he said that really makes Julian feel good. And so there was like a few things that were nice.
You said you spoke 10 hours with him. I mean, were there things, what?
I mean, it was off and on. There were periods when he was like, I have to hide my phone, or,
I see.
It wasn't completely for 10 hours, but over the span of 10 hours, we were messaging back and forth. There were phone calls.
Is there anything that was not in your story that he said of interest that you might be able to tell us now?
there were a lot of things said that were of interest, but nothing that I feel comfortable sharing.
I see.